Welcome to the first part of the physiology of reproduction. In this part, we'll describe the male reproductive system. Before we get into that description, let's talk about the sexual differentiation of the male and female reproductive systems. The undifferentiated reproductive system and the embryo. Basically, it contains undifferentiated gonads, that's indifferent gonads, which will differentiate later on into a testis or ovary, and contain germ cells, which will differentiate into spermatogonia, which give rise to sperms, or the oogonia, which give rise to the oocyte, and somatic cells, which will differentiate into sertoli cells and Leydig cells in the male, and granulosa cells and theca cells of the female, and the Mullerian duct and the Wolffian duct, which will develop either to a female reproductive system or a male reproductive system. Now, the indifferent gonads of the embryo will develop into the testis, and this depends on the genetic makeup of the individual. If the individual contain the XY chromosome, then this indifferent gonad will become a testis. But if the individual contain XXY chromosome, then the indifferent gonad will differentiate or develop into the ovary. Now, if it developed to a testis, then the germ cells of the testis will develop into the spermatogonia, and the somatic cells will become Sertoli cells and Leydig cells. Now, the Sertoli cells of the male will produce this hormone, the anti-Mullerian hormone, which function to inhibit the Mullerian duct, and as a result, it will inhibit the development of the female reproductive system, because the Mullerian duct will give rise to the female reproductive system. And the other thing, the Leydig cells will produce the androgen, and androgen basically it acts to support the Wolffian duct, and the Wolffian duct will give rise to the male reproductive system. So for the Wolffian duct to develop, it needs stimulation by the androgen, and the Wolffian duct will give rise to the male reproductive system, which includes the male genitalia and the male external genitalia. Now, if the individual contained XX chromosome, then the ovary will develop, and the germ cell will differentiate into the oogonia to give the oocyte, and the somatic cells will develop into granulosa cells and the theca cells, and theca cells will produce no hormones, no androgen. So if there is no androgen, then this Wolffian duct will regress, because the Wolffian duct will give rise to a male reproductive system only if it is stimulated by the androgen. So if there is no androgen, this Wolffian duct will regress, and the male reproductive system will not develop. Now, the granulosa cells will not produce also the AMH, and that is the anti-Mullerian hormone. And for the Mullerian duct to regress, it is required this hormone, the anti-Mullerian hormone. So the anti-Mullerian hormone, as we said before, it inhibits the Mullerian duct development and the female reproductive system. So if there is no AMH, then the Mullerian duct will develop, and the female genital tract will develop, and we'll see the female external genitalia as well, which include the labia, vulva, and the clitoris. Basically, and in short, in the absence of any hormonal stimulation, so if there is no androgen, no AMH, then the Mullerian duct will develop and the female reproductive system will develop. So this is default. Now, for the male reproductive system to develop, it needs a hormonal stimulation, and that is the androgen to support the Wolffian duct development, and the anti-Mullerian hormone, the AMH, to suppress the Mullerian duct development. What is the general function of the reproductive system? Basically, I will talk about three major functions. The first one is to develop the spermatozoa, that is the sperm, which will develop in the testis, and we'll talk about this one in detail later on. And then to deliver those sperm into the female reproductive tract or reproductive system, and finally to produce male hormones, which includes the testosterone and the androgen. Let's briefly describe the functional anatomy of the male reproductive system and start with the testicles. The testicles, its function is to produce the sperm, so it is the site of sperm production and the testosterone synthesis. Remember, the sperms contain half number of chromosomes, so half number of genetic makeup, and the other part is the epididymis. This is the storage site for the sperm, and it provides the appropriate environment for their maturation. And the scrotum, it acts to protect the testes and regulate the testicular temperature to be 4 to 5 degrees below the body temperature, and the vas deferens, which act to transport sperm from the epididymis into the urethra, and the urethra is a tube inside the penis which transports sperm and the urine to the exterior, and finally the penis, it is the organ of copulation. Let's start talking about the testis, and this is the histology diagram representing the histology of the testis. The testis contain those structures here. We call them seminiferous tubules, and the cross section of this seminiferous tubules showed the following. Inside the seminiferous tubules, we have two types of cells. Those cells include the Sertoli cells and the spermatogonia, which will develop later on into the sperm. And outside those seminiferous tubules, we have interstitial cells or the Leydig cells, and we'll talk about them in detail later on. So the sperm contains three parts. That is the head, which contains the nucleus, and this is the acrosome, which contains enzyme that is required for the penetration of the sperm to the ova, and then this midpiece, and finally this is the tail. So what is the primary function? What's the function of the testis? It is the primary sex organ of the male, and they are housed in the secretal sac. It is function to produce sperm, that is the spermatogenesis, and it produce hormones, and mainly we are talking about the androgen or testosterone. And the androgen and testosterone, their function is to support the development of the male secondary sex characteristics and the male libido, that is the male sexual desire, and it acts to support general anabolism of the body, so it has a general anabolic effect. Now, what is the function of the scrotum? The scrotum is two-loop sac developed from the inguinal scan to accommodate the testis, and its function to support and protect the testis. And most importantly, its act to regulate testicular temperature to be 4 to 5 degrees below normal body temperature. And it does this through three different mechanisms. The first one is the cremaster muscle, the second one is sebaceous and sweating gland, and the third one is the pampiniform plexus. Now, the cremaster muscle, in fact, which is part of the spermatic cord here, during hot conditions, the cremaster muscle relaxes, which allow for dropping the testis away or from the heat of the body. But during cold season or cold weather, the cremaster muscles, in fact, they contract, and this will lead to bringing the testis near to the body. The sebaceous and the sweating gland, in fact, the scrotum contain large number of sebaceous and sweating gland, and those, in fact, they help in lowering the scrotal temperature. And the third one is the pampiniform plexus. That is where the testicular vein is coiled around the testicular artery. So this is the testicular vein, this is the testicular artery. So the testicular vein is coiled around the testicular artery. So what this does, In fact, it acts to cool the warm blood of the artery before reaching the testis. So the venous blood coming from here, it is coiled around the arterial blood, so it will cool down the blood coming from the body into the testis. We have two conditions where the testes fail to descend into the scrotum, and we call them as cryptorchidism. So cryptorchidism is a condition in which testes fail to descend into the scrotum. This could be unilateral, only one testis fail to descend, or bilateral if both testes fail to descend. In the unilateral cryptorchidism, only one testis is retained inside the abdomen and fails to perform its function, while the other testis is normal, and as a result it functions normally. So the animal may be fertile because one testis is supposed to be enough to produce sperm, which will make the male is fertile. However, if there is a bilateral cryptorchidism, that simply means both testes fail to descend and they are retained in the abdomen, and in this case the animal is infertile because both testes, they are retained inside the body, and the major effect of which make the testis unfunctional is the body temperature. Okay. Let's talk about the hormonal regulation of the male reproductive system, and start with the hypothalamus, which produces the gonadotropin releasing hormone. That's the gonadotropin releasing hormone, which will affect the anterior pituitary gland to produce the gonadotropins. And the gonadotropins are the FSH, that is the follicle stimulating hormone, and the LH, which is the luteinizing hormone. Now the LH, in fact, it will stimulate the Leydig cells. The Leydig cells, in fact, it is present here between the seminiferous tubule. This is the seminiferous tubule, and they are between the seminiferous tubules, or sometimes they call it interstitial cell. So the Leydig cells, in fact, they have receptors for the LH, and the LH stimulate those cells to produce the testosterone. This is the main product, and the testosterone, it will be secreted into the blood, and this is responsible for to support the body and to support the male sexual characteristics. The other testosterone will diffuse into the seminiferous tubules, and this is very important to support the process of spermatogenesis, which will occur here within the seminiferous tubules. The other hormone, that is the FSH, will affect the Sertoli cells, and the Sertoli cells is inside the seminiferous tubules, and it will stimulate those cells to produce the androgen binding protein. The androgen binding protein, in fact, it will bind to the testosterone within the seminiferous tubules, and it will maintain the concentration of the testosterone within the seminiferous tubule high, because this high concentration of testosterone within the seminiferous tubule is very important to support the process of spermatogenesis. And the other product of this cell, that is the Sertoli cells, is the inhibin, and the inhibin, in fact, it acts to suppress or inhibit the FSH secretion, and that's why they call this hormone as inhibin, because it inhibits the FSH secretion. On the other hand, the testosterone also, it give a negative feedback mechanism, so it suppress the LH secretion, and also it suppress the GnRH, or the gonadotropin releasing hormone secretion. What are the functions of the testicular cells? And we'll start with the Leydig cells. The Leydig cells, as we said, it is between the seminiferous tubules, and it produces the testosterone. And the function of the testosterone include supporting spermatogenesis, stimulate the growth and development of secondary sex organs such as the prostatic gland and the bulbourethral gland, and stimulate masculinization, which are the male characteristics, and it will enhance the male libido. The other type of cell is the Sertoli cell, which occur within the seminiferous tubules, and it acts to nourish and support the development of sperm during spermatogenesis, and also it acts to phagocytosize or phagocytosis of defective sperms and provide the blood testis barrier. This is very important to protect the testis from toxins in the blood. It is very similar to the blood-brain barrier. So, and also it produces different type of secretion, and those include the liminal fluid within the seminiferous tubules, and produce the androgen binding protein, which bind to the testosterone and maintain the high concentration of the testosterone within the seminiferous tubules, and produces the inhibin, which acts to suppress the FSH secretion and secrete the Mullerian inhibitory substance, which is the AMH, which acts to suppress or inhibit the Mullerian duct development during the process of sexual differentiation. Let's talk in more detail about the spermatogenesis, which is the production of spermatozoa. This process occurs in the Sertoli cells of the seminiferous tubules. Let's assume this is the seminiferous tubules. This is the wall of the seminiferous tubules. Here we have the spermatogonium, which contain double number of chromosomes, that is the 2n. Then those spermatogonium will develop into the primary spermatocyte by the process of mitosis. So spermatogonia divide by mitosis and mature into primary spermatocyte. Now, the primary spermatocyte will develop into the secondary spermatocyte by meiosis. The first meiosis result in reduction of the number of the chromosome. So those 2n will become 1n. So they contain half number of chromosome, and it produces 2 cells. So it produces those 2 secondary spermatocytes. Those secondary spermatocytes, again, they will undergo another meiosis, but this meiosis, in fact, it is very similar to mitosis, and there is no reduction in the number of the chromosome, and it will give 4 cells. So those spermatids, 4 spermatids, and those spermatids will develop through the process of differentiation into a mature sperm. So spermatids migrate toward the lumen. So this is the lumen, and this is the wall of the seminiferous tubules. So they progress from the wall into the center of the seminiferous tubules. And the spermatogenesis is the differentiation of a spermatid into mature spermatozoa or mature sperm cell. And during this process, what happens is the formation of the acrosome. This is the acrosome. This is the cap on the head of the sperm, which contains enzyme which are required for the penetration of the ova during the process of fertilization. We'll describe this one later on. And then condensation and elongation of the nucleus, and finally the formation of the flagellum. Now, what is the function of the epididymis? This is the epididymis. The first one, it transports the sperm, and it stores those sperms which are produced by the testis. And second thing is to provide nutrition to those sperm which are stored here. And the sperm, in fact, they gain motility. They become motile in the epididymis, and they gain full maturity. So they become mature here. And also it can produce phagocytosis of dead sperms. Then we talk about the vas deferens. The vas deferens, or the ductus deferens, is a muscular tube connecting the tail of the epididymis to the urethra. There are 2 processes we have to describe. The first one is the erection. The erection, in fact, it is the enlargement of the penis that prepares the male for breeding. And what happens during this process is to increase blood flow through the arteries to the penis and reduce the amount of the blood that is leaving the penis through the vein. So what happens is a dilation of the arteries, which allow for increasing the blood flow into the organ, and at the same time there is a compression of the vein which carry blood away from the penis by the contraction of the ischial cavernosus muscle. So the net effect is more blood is coming to the organ and less is leaving the organ, that is the penis, and this will lead to the process of erection. The other thing is the ejaculation. The ejaculation fact, it is the reflex of semen ejection from the penis. And what happens during this process of ejaculation, first of all is the closure of the muscle sphincter around the neck of the urinary bladder, and this is very important to prevent the movement of sperm into the bladder. And second, there is a rhythmic contraction of the urethra, which acts to pump the semen into the female reproductive tract.